Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Intermediary Masterclass. My name's Edwina McQueen. I'm an independent apprenticeship consultant working for the National Skills Academy on behalf of this project and facilitating particularly the Intermediary Masterclasses. And normally we've been doing these masterclasses face-to-face, and they've been very interactive with different quizzes and different activities. Obviously, in this current situation, we're not able to do it face-to-face, but we are using Zoom, so we've tried to include some we have included an interactive workshop which Martyn will lead a little bit later. But I'm just going to hand over to Martyn so that he can introduce himself as well.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Martyn. I'm co-hosting this masterclass this morning with Ed. First of all, what I'd like to do is run through the agenda. So a little bit of housekeeping. I'm hoping that everybody knows the location of the toilets, tea, coffee and biscuits, where they are. There is no planned fire alarm today, so if you do hear the alarm go off, please report to your local assembly point. As you're aware, we're using Zoom to deliver this masterclass. I'm not sure of the skill level of people who are on the masterclass using the Zoom app. So what we're going to do is just going to run through a couple of very small basics just for everybody. If you would move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a toolbar appear. There is a chat icon. If you click on that at the moment, there's actually a PDF of the toolbox, which we will be reviewing later on. Could I ask you if it would be possible for you to download that at this stage, please? Because we'll be using that later on. Please don't worry if you haven't had any experience with Zoom. Everything that we're going to do will lead you through, and we're online, obviously, to help you. In addition, if you have any questions at any stage throughout the session, please use the chat bar to ask questions. We'll endeavour to either answer them at that time, or if you notice on this the slide deck, the last point on the agenda is a Q&A session, which we'll run through. The PDF that you're downloading is the toolbox, which has been designed for all levels of intermediaries to use, to help all levels of SMEs when they're sort of like delivering or finding out about this apprentice service. So it's been designed for all levels. So there are some bits that maybe intermediaries might not need to use, depending on the knowledge set of the people that they're actually be delivering this to. We're going to run through the aims of the masterclass, how the apprenticeships have changed for smaller employers. We're also going to be talking about the benefits of the apprenticeship standards. We're going to be doing some thing about the Apprenticeship Service. We're going to be introducing the Toolkit later on. We'll be doing some group work there. There is only a nice small group of you, so it should be very interactive. We'll talk about the roles of the intermediaries and support available, and then there'll be the Q&A at the end. There will be a feedback form downloaded during the course of the event, of the session, which will also turn up in the chat facility as a link. So I'm now going to pass you over to Ed, who's going to take the next part of this.
Okay, so the aims of the masterclass is to talk about how apprenticeships have changed, particularly for smaller employers. There's going to be a section on understanding the Apprenticeship Service and how you can support smaller employers with the Apprenticeship Service. We're going to talk a little bit more about how apprenticeships can also add value and deliver return on investment for smaller employers. And as Martyn said, we're going to do a tour and a workshop on the toolkit, so you can actually get inside that and see how that works. But before we go into that detail, thought it was just useful to have a look back at the apprenticeship journey so far. So just as a reminder, So Doug Richards produced his report around apprenticeships in 2012, and his report identified 4 key areas. There were a number of key areas actually, but 4 main principles around apprenticeships going forward. First one was that employers should be in the driving seat. That's all employers of all sizes. That apprenticeships are real jobs, but large employers should actually pay for apprenticeships. And he also introduced endpoint assessment, basically saying that apprenticeships should be independently assessed. So in 2012, the apprenticeship standards development work began with trailblazer groups of large and small employers. Currently, there's over 550 live apprenticeship standards that's being developed in that way. There's about 600 in total, some are waiting to be released. In May 2017, the levy was introduced for levy paying employers with over a pay bill of 3 million. So that was the tax, the 0.5% tax that went into the government for paying apprenticeships. At that time, the ESFA also introduced the Apprenticeship Service. That was a digital service for large employers. Sorry, my voice went then. So that was the digital service for the large employers. And in January this year, January 2020, that digital service opened up for small employers. And this is really the main part of why we've set up the Intermediary service with the ESFA to actually support those smaller employers. And what's quite key with this, at the far right of the screen, you'll see that the non-levy contracts end in November 2020. So what that means is training providers who have previously had contract allocations from the ESFA will no longer have those contracts from the ESFA from November going forward, but funding for SMEs will all be through the Apprenticeship Service. Also, another key date is that in August this year, all apprenticeships, all old apprenticeship frameworks will cease. So what that actually means is no apprentice can actually register have a new start on an old apprenticeship framework. All new starts have to be on the apprenticeship standards. If apprentices are already on an apprenticeship framework, that will be okay, and they will be able to continue till the end of their apprenticeship. Similarly, if any apprentice is being funded by a funding allocation, a non-levy contract, that will also continue until the end of the apprenticeship. So how have apprenticeships changed for small employers, and particularly around the Apprenticeship Service? So the Apprenticeship Service provides a lot more flexibility for the small employers to choose a partner of their choice. Using the Apprenticeship Service, they're no longer restricted to their local training provider or college, although they may still wish to use their local training provider or college. The service actually opens up opportunities for them to choose a vast array of training providers, both national and local training providers. It will also give them information on that provider, things like their Ofsted rating, and also feedback from other employers that have used them. And why that's important to them is because the service actually gives them the opportunity to choose the right apprenticeship standards. So apprenticeship standards are linked to job roles, and as I mentioned earlier, there's 550 coming up to 600 different types of apprenticeship standards. So it's really important that the small business looks for the apprenticeship standards that's applicable to them, and then chooses a provider off the register who can deliver that apprenticeship service for them. The service will also allow them to manage their own apprenticeship funding and create payment plans with their training provider. They may choose not to use the service themselves, but actually ask their provider to do it, and that's fine too. But if they want to manage it themselves, they certainly can. The service encourages collaborative working between the employer and the provider. So this is about having a different conversation, the provider having a different conversation with the employer and vice versa. It's about the employer talking about what their strategy is for their business, where they're looking to take their business, and the skills that they're looking to fill in their business, so that they're getting the right apprenticeship standard for their business. There's also an opportunity to co-create programs that meets the knowledge, skills and behaviours that the employer wants, and that's done through that strategic conversation that I've just mentioned, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Small employers can also find their own endpoint assessment organisation on the service if they choose to. They can look at who's delivering that standard and choose the endpoint assessment organisation themselves. And it's all on the digital platform, which is easy to use. And I'll show you, we'll run through a video in a minute, so I'll show you how you can create accounts. For the training providers, it shouldn't be underestimated that this is going to be a really big change for training providers, because it is a new way of working for them, which encourages better partnership working with their employers. It's about the providers having one conversation and having a partnership relationship with the employer outside of the ESFA. Providers have the ability to support employers through the apprenticeship journey, very much tailoring their offer to what the small business wants. And as I mentioned earlier, that the training providers will also have access to the digital apprenticeship service as well, so they can actually support the small business with managing the account, if the small business wishes them to do that. And in doing that, they will also have a real-time view of excuse me, of funding. And just as a reminder, really, there are 2.6 million small employers in England, so quite a big change. Okay, so the benefits of an apprenticeship standard. The apprenticeship standards, as I've mentioned, they're all designed around job roles, and there's 600 of them. So there's a lot to choose from. So they are an effective way of filling skills gaps. So it's particularly in the current climate. I put this one here before as an example of digital marketing, but there are loads of digital standards to choose from. But just as an example, if they're looking to fill any good digital skills gaps, they might want to be recruiting a young person who's got some of those skills into their business. So that's a cost-effective way of actually doing that. It's also a cost-effective way of developing existing employees, and I'll put an example there of team leading, but it can be of anything. If the company is looking to expand their team or give development opportunities, using the apprenticeship standards is an effective way of doing that. Within a lot of the standards, there are workplace projects, I mentioned co-creation earlier on. Small businesses can actually have the conversation with their training provider about what work-based project they might like to include in their apprenticeship standard, something that they might like their apprentice to work on. So that could be, some examples could be about driving business growth, process improvement, efficiency savings. It's about thinking more innovatively around, and the provider having the conversation with the small business about, you know, where do you want to take your business, what would be a benefit to your business, and creating a workplace project around that. I think it's not new news to most people who've been living in the world of apprenticeships that apprentices normally create loyal staff, which means there's high staff retention, lower reduction in absence, and there is some stats in the toolkit around that. Okay, I mentioned this on the first slide as a key date, and just to mention it again, smaller employers are transitioning to the apprenticeship service now, and up until November 2020, or so should I say from November 2020, there'll be no non-levy contracts for training providers. So it's really important that small employers get on the service. Because as I said, the non-levy contracts have been phased out and will be phased out in November 2020. Some providers may still have some funding allocation left, or some providers may have actually used their funding allocation. But at the moment, there are 3 ways in which small businesses can access funds up until November 2020. So they can create an account on the Apprenticeship Service. I'm going to show you in a minute how they do that. And they can reserve funding for a maximum of 3 apprenticeships. At the moment, and because this has been phased in from now up until November, there is a maximum of 3 apprentices using the service in this way. That may change going forward, but at the moment that's what it is. That doesn't mean to say that a small business can only do 3 apprentices though, because they have 2 other options available to them, which I'll cover that in a minute. I should say on the account as well, you can reserve funds for 3 months, so that's a rolling 3 months. So when you actually go in and reserve funds, if you were to reserve funds now, you'd be able to reserve funds for April, May and June, and then July will come on and April will drop off. So it will be a rolling 3 months of funding in the account, as opposed to 12 months of funding or 18 months, however long the duration of the apprenticeship is. But the full funding will be there, but it will be rolling 3 months. And as I said, that at the moment it's restricted to 3 apprentices, but in that way, but that might change. As I said, that doesn't restrict the small businesses from having more apprentices if they've got jobs for them. They could also accept a levy transfer fund from a large organisation. So this is a large organisation who's a levy payer who has unused funds that they haven't spent themselves. So actually using the Apprenticeship Service, it will be much easier to transfer, for the large levy payer to transfer funds straight into the small employer's Apprenticeship Service account using the service. And they can still continue to use the traditional route of training providers, as I said earlier, where there's funding available. So where training providers have a funding contract with unspent funds, they can continue to use that up until November. Choosing options 1 and 2 on that list gives employers far more choice, and those are the 2 options that employers will be able to use going forward past November 2020. So understanding the apprenticeship service, as I mentioned earlier, it's an online platform, it's easy to use, and it will give small employers control over their apprenticeships and also visibility over their apprentices. They'll be able to manage the funding, and they'll be able to drive the quality through a collaborative partnership with their providers. They'll be able to create an account, they'll be able to reserve funding, they'll be able to accept levy funding transfers, they'll be able to choose providers, see how providers perform, pay the training provider, and many other things through the apprenticeship service. So I'm just going to share now a short video that shows you how small employers can register onto this service. Oh, well, I will show it you in a minute. I'm having a problem with my cursor today.
Okay. Welcome to this video taking you through the process for registering an apprenticeship service account. Once you have registered, you will be able to manage your apprenticeship funds and pay your chosen training provider. You will also be able to send a transfer of apprenticeship funds if your organisation pays the apprenticeship levy or receive a transfer from a levy-paying employer. To begin the process, go to the Manage Apprenticeships part of the service. You can find a link on our guidance page on gov.uk. Just search for Register and use the Apprenticeship Service, or follow the links included in the video description. It's important you read the guidance before you start the registration process. Every time you log into your account, you will be presented with the same starting screens. As this will be the first time you have created an account, you will need some key information to hand. You will need at least one PAYE scheme and the organisation's Government Gateway ID and password for that scheme. For more detail on the Gateway ID and the information you need to register, view our other video titled What You Need to Set Up an Apprenticeship Service Account. Firstly, you need to register as a user. Don't worry, you can add more users and change the levels of access to your account once you have set it up. Enter your name, email address, and create a password. A verification code will then be sent to you by email. Enter the code to confirm your identity and continue. Next, you will be asked to register your organisation. The details you enter must match the information on any contract you have with your training provider. Any of your connected organisations that enter into a contract for apprenticeship training needs to be added to your account. You can add connected organisations to the apprenticeship account once you have set it up. Enter your company's house number, charity number, or do a search by inserting your organisation's legal name. If your organisation is displayed on the screen, click on your name, then confirm your details. If you can't see your organisation's name, you can enter the details manually by selecting this option, which you can find at the end of the search results. Enter your organisation's name and postcode, then select your address. If your address is not displayed, you can enter it by filling in the relevant fields. check the details are correct before you continue. You will then need to add a PAYE scheme. Using your organisation's government gateway details, you'll be asked to grant authority for your tax details to be used. By doing this, you allow HMRC to send to the Education and Skills Funding Agency, ESFA, details of the amount of levy you have paid to that particular scheme. This will enable us to display the correct apprenticeship funds in your account. After you have entered your credentials, the system will ask you to confirm the PAYE scheme details to complete the setup. Please note, individual or agent login details do not work. Only the organisation's Gateway ID grants the level of access needed to display your information. You can add more PAYE schemes once you have set up your account. You will need an organisation's gateway details for each individual scheme you want to add. You will now be prompted to add additional users, connected organisations and PAYE schemes. You have the option to close the prompt and to add additional users manually later. We would advise you always to have a minimum of 2 account owners. This is for security purposes and in case the person who set up the account is unavailable. Finally, you will also be asked if you want to sign the Employer Apprenticeship Agreement with the ESFA. If you are not authorised to sign legal agreements on behalf of your organisation, this can be actioned by an appropriate user at a later date. However, you must ensure the agreement is signed before any payments to training providers can take place. Your account is now set up and ready to use. You can start to add additional details, including adding your apprentices and setting up payments with your chosen training providers. As I mentioned at the start of the video, please also read our guidance called Register and Use the Apprenticeship Service on gov.uk. It provides simple instructions and additional supporting information on how to register and use your account. If you experience any issues when registering or you have any questions, contact the National Apprenticeship Service for advice on 08000 150 600. To keep up to date with the latest news about the Apprenticeship Service, read our blog and follow us on Twitter. Also, check out our Education and Skills Funding Agency YouTube page for additional support videos. Many thanks for listening.
Okay, so just picking up a couple of things on that video, just for clarification really. Small businesses who are planning on taking on apprenticeships and using the service in this way, they can, and I would recommend that they do, register and create an account now. Then they're already set up for when they actually start recruiting an apprentice. I would advise that they don't draw down any funding until they've got their apprenticeships, should I say, in place. But there's nothing stopping them registering on the account and getting ready for when they have got, when they are ready to draw down funds. The other thing that it mentioned on that video was connecting companies. Just to clarify, a connecting company is a company that's on another site. So if you're not looking at the very small businesses, but slightly larger businesses who might be spread across 2 sites or have a connecting business, they can actually connect the companies that way on the apprenticeship service. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Martyn, who's going to talk you through what we're going to do next.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. At the beginning of the session, I asked everybody if they could go into the chat area and download the toolkit onto their own laptops or PCs, whatever they're using. I just wondered if anybody could tell me if they've all done that. If the people that came in a little bit late, if you could go down to the bottom of the page on Zoom, there's the chat icon. If you click on that, in there should be a PDF of the toolkit that you're going to get a chance to review in a minute. It's important to say that the toolkit is accurate as of the time of this session, but it is subject to change. It is just to be used for today, and we'd like to ask you not to actually distribute it at this stage. We will be talking, or Ed will be talking, about something called a microsite a little bit later on, and the plan is for the toolkit eventually, hopefully very soon, to turn up on the website, so you will actually be able to get a view of it in its entirety at that stage. What we're going to do in a second, we're going to put you into into a breakout room, and I'll come in there and I'll put the slides up so you can either review it yourselves or I'll run through it with you. So don't worry. Just before we do that, there's just to remember that the actual toolkit has been designed for intermediaries to help every single level of small employers, regardless of where they are within the process. So some of them might find it that there's bits in there that they don't really need or they already know, but others might need to sort of like to tailor it depending on their audience. So there's actually 14 different parts on this. There is the first part is how to use the toolkit. The second bit, it runs through how the apprenticeships have changed. The third bit is all about a little bit about what Ed has just covered about the apprentice service. There's a bit about the apprentice standards. Number 5 is all about endpoint assessment, and the whole process that we're going through with this is all about being geared to give the employers much more control over their apprenticeships and the way that they would like them to be. You've got how to know the apprentice's right route for the small employers. There's a little bit in 7 about different types of finances or the financials. Picking the right apprentice provider is 8. 9 is the apprenticeship facts with some details of the percentages of success rates of different parts of. 10 is suitability. 11 is all about actually planning an apprenticeship program. 12 is about the first few weeks. 13 is after the apprenticeship. And then section 14 has a lot of wonderful different bits of support. There's lots of links and websites and YouTube videos for people to use throughout the whole toolkit. What we're going to do now, we're now going to put you into a breakout room. What I'd like you to do is, if you can see the slide at the moment, there are some yellow highlighted parts. These are the bits that people who have actually run through the toolkit before have found most valuable. So things like registering on the Apprenticeship Service, accepting levy transfers, how to create a government ID. You can probably read them better than I can from where you are, so I'm not going to read them all. Once we've put you into the breakout room, it's a very small activity. We're going to put you in there for approximately 20 minutes. What we'd like you to do is, when you get in there, unmute so you can talk to each other. Have a review of the toolbox. For those who haven't been able to actually download it, I will come in and I will put it up. And I'll have to lead you through it. But the other people who've got it themselves, maybe you could have a look at it. And please, have a think about deciding which ones you think you find more valuable and you're more likely to promote to the small employers, and maybe some other things in there that you might think that some different tools that you might think could be developed, because this is still a working feast. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask Tom to put you into the breakout room. Don't worry, you don't need to do anything. If you could make a note of what the objectives are, and then what we'll do is, once we've had the 20 minutes, we'll bring you out, and then what you can do is you can all, we'll have a discussion and swap some ideas. So if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, Dennis, Stacey and Sam.
Okay.
Yeah, still here, Martyn.
Ah, good stuff. Stacey, you there? Just one. I know.
There we are. So I found the button.
Oh, brilliant! Bottom left. Yeah, just sort of like just quickly. I know some of you were able to actually view it yourselves. Others obviously just were being driven by me, which possibly wasn't ideal. First view of Dennis. What did you think? Any positives?
Absolutely, Martyn. Very comprehensive. I can see, especially smaller employers that need a lot of hand-holding in the first instance. I think it'd be really useful for them. Now, it might have been included in one of the slides, Martyn, but I'm going to pose the question anyway. I have put a question to you regarding practical examples of 20% off the job training.
Yeah.
The other question was as well. I attended an ESFA intermediary event a few weeks ago. Actually, no, a few months ago now. All of these days seem to blend into each other. And it was one of the questions that was posed by the ESFA, which was an interesting one, was what do you think some of the challenges or concerns will be, especially from SMEs, with the shift from frameworks to standards? And I just wondered, was there anything in there that sort of highlighted, I suppose, the difference, but probably more importantly, the benefits of that shift?
I'm gonna ask Ed that one. Ed, do you remember if you saw anything in the toolkit about that?
I think it's under number 4.
Number 4. Yeah, I thought it was
Standards.
Yeah, I mean it's really comprehensive. So I'm sure they will be stuff in there.
Sorry, there's a bit on in the apprenticeship standards. It says standards will allow employers to co-create the content of an apprenticeship program in partnership with their training provider. They can customize content to specific employer needs. Smaller employers particularly want the most value from apprenticeship programs, and as most standards have work-based projects integrated into them, it means lots more opportunities for an employer to use these projects to help apprenticeships make improvements to their businesses. So there is a bit actually on that on section 4 as Sam highlighted.
Yeah. Do you want me to pick up on some of that? As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the work-based projects are a good way for employers to get involved. I do think, however, there will have to be a different conversation with the small business. So the small business will have to know that they can do this, that they can say to their training provider, actually, this is what I want, rather being driven by the training provider. So it is a different conversation that small businesses will have to have. But just picking up your off the job there, Dennis, as well. I think the question was any practical examples about the 20% off the job. So the 20% off the job, it can be a bit of a deal breaker for small businesses, especially you've probably heard that about that's 1 day a week not at work. That isn't how it should be perceived, and we need to be really careful when we're actually talking to small employers about that, because we need to sell the benefits of it, because that 1 day working on their work-based project or the off-the-job project doesn't have to be in a college or a training provider. It can actually be in the person's place of work, and they could actually be doing their project in the workplace. So I think training providers as well need to think differently about that. So in answer to your question about off the job, they could use a project so long as it was demonstrating and developing skills and progression as some of their off the job. So I think that was the question. Sorry, Martyn.
That's all right. No.
Sorry, thanks, Martyn. Thanks, Edwina. I think I absolutely agree, but I think if there can be something in there, because I do think that I think you're absolutely right. I think the 20% off the job you sort of named it there can be a deal breaker for a lot of SMEs. But I think if there can be even a couple of lines around some practical examples that they potentially can take to a provider, because I think depending on who the provider is, there's still a bit of a culture and a mindset that they're thinking about their own needs over and above the needs of the employer. So for example, and you probably know where I'm going with this, so I think if you have providers that have a cohort of students in on a day, what they're much more likely to do is to impose that day on the employer as a 20% off the job consideration. I think if we can include some practical examples to state that actually it doesn't have to be this way, and that's almost sort of empowering the employer to, when they're approaching or when they're recruiting an apprentice, to provide that with exactly, well, yes, this is what you want, but as an employer, this is what I want, and I know it's a way that we can do it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Dennis, because, you know, I mentioned earlier some of the challenges for providers, and that will be a challenge because they've got their own processes, the way that they do things in their own business. So now we're asking them to change it. Yeah, we'll take that away, and, you know, maybe, I'm not promising, maybe we can do a video or something around that. But it is the role, you know, the role of the intermediary to hope, you know, to spread this message as well. So if we can come to all angles, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Dennis.
Thanks,
Sam?
Martyn.
Stacey?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm still here.
Lovely. Just wondered if you had any feedback, whether you just followed me or whether you managed to download it yourself. What your first view was?
I followed you, so thank you for that. I think I know this is a masterclass, so I think this has caused a little bit of a problem for me. I'm quite new to providing business support for businesses in East Riding, and I think I probably don't have the fundamental knowledge that I needed to be able to come on this session today. So for me, I'm not in a position yet to be able to sell this to businesses, because I haven't got the fundamental information in my head yet about, you know, how much does it cost them. I can see that this tool is going to be really excellent for them to sign up to, and everything that they need will be on there. But I think because I haven't got the background knowledge before coming on this session, I don't feel I can sell it to them yet. So I probably needed a more basic course before I came on this.
Okay. To be fair, I'd have to ask maybe the others where would you believe you would be able to get that support from?
Sorry, Martyn, what was the question?
No, Stacey was saying that she didn't feel that she had the fundamental knowledge to be able to sell this as yet, for actually knowledge of the process herself. And I was just asking, I wondered if where maybe one of you, either you or Sam, might suggest where she might be able to find some more information for, or is it just a case of reading up on the internet and getting information?
It's a good question, Martyn. And to be honest, I mean, there's a whole host of information out there. I mean, a really good group to access. Sorry, was it Stacey?
Yes.
Yeah.
What I would recommend, Stacey, if you have a group, is I am part of the North East Apprenticeship Ambassador Network. Now, if you're not familiar with that, there are 9 networks across the country.
Yeah.
They were set up by government. It is employer-led, and it is like-minded employers that are very active and very pro apprenticeships. Now, so that's a great point of call as a starting point. But also, I think I would probably recommend going sort of back to basics and looking at some of the gov.uk sites that can take you on that journey, if you like, that Ed alluded to earlier in the presentation, around where all of the reforms came in and all of the changes and all of the sort of the various acronyms. Also, the Institute for Apprenticeships is a really good resource as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I definitely spend a little bit of time looking at that. Thank you.
Brilliant, Dennis. Thank you.
And thanks for that, Dennis. And just Stacey, actually the toolkit's a really great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it actually, on the financials, it does give you information on the financials there. Just a little bit of background on the financials. If a small business is working with a large levy paying employer, they actually don't pay anything because you can transfer 100% of the funds. But if they're doing it independently through their own apprenticeship service, it's 95% of funds and they pay 5%, but it just does depend on the individual apprentices, and so there's other criteria around that. But have a, you know, I'd say it'll be up there in the next few days when I show you the microsite in a bit. Register on that, have a look, and you'll have all of the links in one place, because that's one of the great things about this toolkit. It's got everything in one place that you'd need it.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Mark.
Thanks, Stacey. Sam?
Yeah, no, it was just, I mean, I'm pretty new to this as well, really.
Okay.
So I did attend a workshop at a training provider, and I think, you know, perhaps where the training providers are going, they're looking to take responsibility for a lot of this on behalf of the companies that they work for. I work with a lot of construction companies.
Okay.
And I think it is a massive change for people. So it's just really getting your head around what they need to be able to set it up. And I don't know whether it's got anything in there about, I know you can only get up to 3 apprentices at the moment. I don't know how flexible it is in terms of how much sort of leading time do they need to apply for the funding. I know it only lasts for like 3 months, doesn't it? If you don't then approve it or something, you lose it in the 3 months. So I don't know, maybe they're questions down the line, but I mean, I think, you know, anything's a good starting, well, it's not a starting point, it has been obviously very well developed, but it's just trying to get companies to then move on to this, and I think a lot of them probably will sort of stay with their providers and they will do it on their behalves.
Yeah.
They just don't have the time to look at all of this detail.
Yeah. And just to pick up on that, as I said a little bit earlier, well, the reason why I said don't start drawing down funding until they're ready for it is because they would lose it. But you know, register on the account and start drawing down the funding, the 3 rolling months, when you've got an apprentice to allocated to that funding. So that's the way it would work. And I think you're you know, right, Sam. A lot of small businesses will actually use, especially if they're working with, you know, trusted existing providers, will use those providers to manage the service for them. And as I said earlier, that's perfectly acceptable. They can do that. But we should, as our role as intermediaries, try and, you know, remind them that actually they can look at it, they can see what it looks like, they can see how their apprentices is progressing and the funds that are being paid out. So I would encourage them still to look at the service, even if they're not, you know, managing it themselves. And I'd also say that this is actually what happened with large levy paying employers. Many who had their own actual government funding contracts handed them back and got training providers to manage their accounts for them. But as they learnt, they took them over themselves. So there might be a bit of a transition is what I'm suggesting. Yeah,
no, totally. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's new for everybody, isn't it? And it's going to take some embedding, but I think with the current situation at the moment, obviously people have got other things on mind at the minute. But yeah, it's one of those things, and it's just being mindful and being there to support the employer and make sure they're doing the right thing for them as a business.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I just wasn't sure, once they applied for the funding, is it instant or does it have to get approved? Or because often in construction it's very a last minute thing sometimes, or in some other industries as well.
Yeah, there is a process, and they do have to have a contract in place. But as soon as they've got a contract in place with their provider, it will be downloaded into their account. But perhaps have another look at the video on the microsite again when you get that. I've seen it several times now, so I think you need to look at it a few times to look at the process, really.
Right.
Just a bit mindful of time. So thank you, everyone, for that. What we're going to do now is we're just going to move on to the next part, if everybody's okay.
So I won't repeat it again, but key date, November 2020. The reason why the Apprenticeship Intermediary Service has been set up via the ESFA in partnership with NSAR is to deliver support to smaller businesses. So far we've delivered, or we've engaged 366 intermediaries, 56 employers, events and intermediary events, 43 intermediary masterclasses, 4 providers masterclasses, and 5 webinars. So that the role of the intermediary, as I mentioned earlier, is to advocate apprenticeships to small employers, to help small employers understand the business case for apprenticeships, and to help them make their program employer-led. And that is about having a different conversation with their training providers and letting them know that they can do that. So as I mentioned and Martyn mentioned earlier, there is a microsite available. This is where the toolkit is going to arrive in shortly. But currently, I'll give you a link in a minute. Currently, the microsite is up and available there. It's got lots of really good resources and tools on it. In fact, Tom's actually put a link in the chat around the resources as well. But if you sign up to the microsite, you'll get access to some of the videos I've shown you, plus more, plus lots of really useful information. And we're also putting case studies on there. So there's due to be a case study from a small business going on there soon, but we will keep updating it, and that's where the toolkit will be. So we ask that you get involved, so you obtain case studies and share feedback, and like I said, we'll upload those onto the microsite. Follow NSAR on social media. They're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and if you've got any queries, there's apprenticeships@nsar.co.uk email address there. Tom's also put in the group chat a feedback form, so if you could download the feedback form as well and give us some feedback on the session today, that would be great. There's the link there, as I mentioned, for the microsite. So it's apprenticeshipsintermediaryservice.co.uk, and you just go onto the register. And like I said, there's some really good videos on there which are useful for you. But that's where the toolkit will be. So that's all that we've got. I mean, we did cover some Q&A in the last session, but if anybody wants to leave now or has any more questions, we're here for a little bit longer if you've got any more questions.
Ed, just a quick question. Sorry, Dennis Heaney here from the North East LEP. Great toolkit. Really keen to try to shout about this at a LEP, from a LEP level across our business network. Will we be getting sort of an individual sort of glossy link that we can start to include in our literature? And also, as many businesses will have, we have a business growth hub, and within there we have an apprenticeship area, apprenticeship information area, if you like. And what we'd like to do is include this link within there. Will we be getting that in the next few days?
Anybody that signs up, obviously, to the microsite will get access to the microsite. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question, if I'm really honest, Dennis. I don't know whether you'd be able to get a link to put into your other marketing material. However, a number of the masterclasses that myself and Martyn run, when we could run it face to face, there was a session on how are you going to use the toolkit to spread the word in it with your with your employers, and lots of organisations were talking about, you know, taking sections out of it, the links in it to actually promote on their own social media.
Right.
So so it I don't know whether you want to add anything, Martyn. That is something that you know, we are encouraging intermediaries do. Whether you'll get a full link as a toolkit, probably not, because if we're updating it, it'll be on the site, microsite, and that's where you'll get the information. So you might want to just take sections out of it and do promotions then. I don't know if I answered your question really, but I will find out for you.
Yeah, it just, I was very conscious that it is a very comprehensive toolkit, and I think it's a toolkit that probably needs to be launched, to one of the better term. And as a LEP, we're a neutrally positioned organisation. So one of the things that we're always doing is sending out new resources, new information, new content that's making life easier for employers to get involved in apprenticeships. So if, you know, and if that involves just sending out a link to businesses to register on the microsite, that's absolutely fine. I suppose what I was thinking is there a sort of a quite nice narrative that you would like us to use as a collective, rather than just putting in a link as such?
Okay, I don't know the answer to that question, so leave it with me, Dennis, and I think we'll have your details from registering on this anyway, so we'll come back to you.
That's great. Thanks, Ed.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
Okay, if I can just remind you, if you could download the feedback form and send it back to us, that would be brilliant. And like I said, make sure you register onto the microsite, because you'll get access to the toolkit in there with all the links which you can just click into, along with videos and lots of other support material that you can use in your role as an intermediary. Okay, thank you everybody, and I hope that was useful.